A new Spider-Man movie is out, so today I'll be ranking all 10 Spider-Man films from the worst to the best. This was definitely a tricky list as a lot of these films are really good, and this is also my favorite movie character of all time. So be sure to leave your own list down below. Also, consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video.
And here we go.
Coming in at last place, we have Spider-Man 3, a movie that does so much wrong on so many levels. Now you will see later in this video, I absolutely love the first two Maguire films. They are the superhero movies I grew up watching, and rewatching these back to back, it just becomes so obvious how dreadful this film is. Firstly, they decide to retcon the death of Uncle Ben from the first film, which was done really well in that movie. Now he was apparently killed by someone else, and by accident too. Really? Secondly, there are way too many plot points and villains in this film. 3 villains to be exact, and none of them are all that good. So it just feels busy and overcrowded. And thirdly, the symbiote storyline doesn't really work for me. I feel like this movie just ruins Peter's character, and the way he behaves just creates so many hard to watch scenes. Even Sam Raimi didn't want to add this storyline, but it was demanded by the studio. Now while it has some good scenes like the final battle, the few good scenes doesn't save it. Even a lot of the CGI looked bad, the best thing to come from it was definitely the memes. In second to last place, we have The Amazing Spider-Man 2. A movie that, while I don't think it's as bad as most people say, still isn't great. It suffers from a lot of the same issues as Spider-Man 3, as it has way too many plots and way too many villains. This results in both of the two main villains being underdeveloped, and they have weak motivations. Speaking of these villains, they are portrayed in a pretty goofy way, especially Electro, who was definitely improved by No Way Home. Looking at the plot itself, it sort of feels like the plot of a second and a third film in a trilogy combined, as there are way too many plot points here. But it isn't terrible, the slow motion action scenes are very cool, and the cast is enjoyable at least. The ending was also really well done. At number 8 is The Amazing Spider-Man. The second version of Spider-Man we ever got definitely had big shoes to fill. And when watching this movie and seeing all the similar origin story plot beats, it's hard to not compare to the 2002 film. And that's why the origin story part of this movie is definitely my least favorite bit, as it does all the main plot points the other film does, but just never as good and sometimes feeling forced. While the plot flowed really nicely in the original. And the whole mystery around Peter's parents is also really unnecessary. But once he gets the Spider-Man outfit on, it gets much better and starts doing more of its own thing to make it unique. What the Amazing Spider-Man movies do really well is the swinging scenes, and in general, all the visuals in this movie is really good. I do think the villain's main goal is pretty silly, but overall I enjoyed the second half of this film. That brings us to Spider-Man Homecoming. This is easily the most rewatchable MCU film, and one that I've put on many times. The way Spider-Man was introduced into this franchise was really clever too, which helped him avoid telling his origin story again for the third time. Instead, we see Spider-Man in his early days as a hero, with Tony being his mentor, who is like always a really fun addition in these movies. The film itself is sort of the MCU's take on a high school movie, and therefore just making it super relatable. A big standout here is definitely Vulture as the villain, played really well by Michael Keaton, who can make this character threatening, but also charismatic. This is also definitely one of the funniest Spider-Man movies. Then we have Spider-Man Far From Home, probably the most underrated movie on this list. While it may have some plot issues, I've always enjoyed this film. It gives us a different take on a Spider-Man movie, as it is set in Europe this time. This results in some nice new locations to see this character in. Again, like the rest of the MCU trilogy, it gives us another great villain in Mysterio. He delivers some of the coolest scenes in the franchise, especially referring to his first illusion scene. And like Homecoming, I find this to be a really funny, and in general, super rewatchable movie. The post-credit scene is also crazy. That brings us to Spider-Man. Such a great origin story for this character that I have many fond memories of, as it's the first superhero movie I've ever seen. So therefore it is responsible for my love of these sorts of films. But other than that, this is easily the best portrayal of Spider-Man and the most accurate we have ever gotten. What does really work so well in this trilogy is that it doesn't need to be connected to a whole bigger universe. It tells a simplistic superhero story contained to one location, populated with many memorable characters. The first Spider-Man movie definitely gave us the franchise's best villain in Green Goblin, who's just portrayed perfectly by Willem Dafoe. The whole cast is great, especially Tobey as Peter. So this is just an excellent introduction to Spider-Man on the big screen, that to this day is still a super entertaining watch. Then we have Spider-Man 2, a sequel that uses everything that worked in the original and expands on it, growing bigger, better, and deeper. Easily some of the most iconic Spider-Man moments are found in this film, like the train battle for example. And again, we get another great villain in Doc Ock. Why this villain is so successful is that we actually get to spend time with this character before he goes mad, and actually see that he is a good guy, which made his story even more tragic. Then the plot itself is really compelling as we see Peter give up the suit, then later having to become the hero again, which just creates a very inspiring film. It really portrays the struggle of Peter balancing his normal life and his hero life so well. So for me, this is a near perfect superhero movie, and even though it isn't first place, it is pretty close. Some of the films in this franchise are really good, so there's strong competition. Entering the top 3, we have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Easily one of the best animated films of all time, that just has so much fun messing around with this cool way of doing animation and visuals. And it is also one of the most rewatchable films of all time, as it is really funny and it's just a quick moving and exciting film. A reason it is so fun is because of all the cool references they add.
We don't really talk about this.
But the characters are really good too, and all of them are very well written. The same can be said about the villains like Prowler and Kingpin, who are really interesting characters. A big standout here is definitely Peter B. Parker, who is a perfect example of how to do a failed hero correctly, and he is given such a satisfying arc. Then of course, Miles is a great lead character too, and all the other versions of Spider-Man are all fun and memorable. In second place is Across the Spider-Verse. Now this is such a good example of what the MCU's multiverse saga can be, as it uses the concept in so many interesting ways, instead of just throwing cameos at you. This movie may use cameos and they are fun, but that isn't the main thing you'll remember afterwards. You remember the plot and the incredible animation. This film is honestly a work of art, every frame is so good looking, and it's a film that requires a few rewatches to spot all the details. It also goes much deeper into these characters' stories, making them more compelling and interesting than they've ever been. It definitely isn't as funny as the original film, but the story it's telling is definitely much more serious, so it doesn't matter. The worst part of the movie is definitely the to be continued screen. But in first place is Spider-Man No Way Home. This can definitely change, but as of now, this is still my favorite Spider-Man movie. Now if I were looking at these and how objectively good they are, this would probably not be in first place, but it's definitely my personal favorite, and definitely my best theater experience. It just gives such satisfying fan service that plays on the right amount of nostalgia, but also fits the story they were telling. It gives this version of Spider-Man such a good character arc, as this whole trilogy is sort of his origin story. And here, we finally get to see him become the Spider-Man we all know and love. But of course, seeing all the previous Spider-Man and villains interact is really fun to watch, and Green Goblin is once again a great main villain. It also nails the serious and emotional moments, as well as still having that fun MCU comedy, so by that, this film comes in at first place.